Good evening and welcome. Just a quick word about logistics. It's okay if folks who don't have a seat want to sit on the floor. We can't block any of the aisles, but if you find a seat in the front, as long as people can get past you and we don't block the interior aisles, then I think we're okay. We will be setting up some extra seats in the hallway. So if you grab one of those, you might be able to see through the doors. And of course, you're welcome to stand in the back, although I realize that's not the most comfortable option. I trust you will be thoroughly enthralled, though, and will be unaware of your status as a standee. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight on behalf of the University of Dayton Speakers Series Committee, the offices of the President and the Provost, and our many campus and community partners who have helped us plan, implement, and promote tonight's address and the related programming with students and faculty and some of our campus friends on campus today. As chair of the new University of Dayton Speaker Series, I'm delighted to be able to welcome Dr. Vandana Shiva to present the inaugural address in this new series, which marries the missions of the former Distinguished Speaker Series and of the Diversity Lecture Series. Our theme for this year's Speaker Series is Building Movements for Social Justice, and Dr. Shiva is certainly a leader in this work. In a few moments, Dr. Shiva will speak to us on the future of food. Following her talk, we will have some time for questions, and we have microphones located in the two centermost aisles. If you would like to pose a question for Dr. Shiva after her talk, please go to one of the microphones. We can form lines behind the microphones if we have multiple questions. Otherwise, you will not be heard. And then following the question and answer period, we will have a time for a book signing. There will be books available for purchase. Dr. Shiva has written a dozen or more books, and many of them, I've learned, have been used in courses here at UD. Perhaps some of you have read one of them. If you've brought a copy of your book, or if you have brought a credit card or cash, you may certainly purchase a book, and she would be happy to sign that for you at the end of the evening. Please take this opportunity to turn off or mute your cell phones or other noise-making devices. To introduce Dr. Vandana Shiva, we have asked Caroline Merrithew from the Department of History to do the honors. Dr. Merrithew is a scholar of American women's and labor history, focusing her research and teaching, much of it on women and social movements. She's also a member of the Women's and Gender Studies affiliated faculty. And she is one of the people who nominated Dr. Vandana Shiva as a speaker for this new series. And I would just say, by way of a side note, please visit the University of Dayton Speaker Series webpage, and there you will find forms to nominate or nominate speakers for co-sponsorship by the series. We'll be entertaining nomination suggestions for speakers for next year's series in the weeks to come this fall. So without further ado, I would ask Dr. Caroline Merrithew to come and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes, and thank you all for coming. I just have one little business thing to take care of before I introduce Dr. Shiva, and that is, if your name is Maura Coleman, I have your wallet. And I'll put it up with me there. So I am so honored to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Vandana Shiva tonight. Dr. Shiva is a world-renowned environmental leader, feminist, and tireless supporter of the earth. In her early academic career, she studied physics and went on to receive her PhD in philosophy at the University of Western Ontario. Her involvement in the Chipko movement during the late 1970s, in which women successfully challenged the Indian government's deforestation policy, was among her first acts of social justice witness and activism. Dr. Shiva's organization, Navdanya, is an international movement which seeks to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seed, and works to promote organic farming and fair trade. Dr. Shiva has written numerous books, including Earth Democracy, Justice, Sustainability, and Peace, and Staying Alive, Women, Ecology, and Development. Dr. Shiva was a founding board member of the Women Environment and Development Organization. She currently chairs the Commission on the Future of Food, set up by the region of Tuscany in Italy, and is a member of the scientific committee which advised President Zapatero of Spain. She is also advising at the invitation of the government of the Kingdom of Bhutan, that country in becoming the first 100% organic sovereign nation. Yes, it can be done, and perhaps we should take the challenge tonight and say University of Dayton should become the first 100% organic university in the country. Dr. Shiva is also advising at the, Dr. Shiva is the recipient of numerous awards: the 1993 Right Livelihood Award, the Global 500 Award of the United Nations Environment Program, and the UN's Earth Day International Award. Please help me in welcoming the first of our 3 University of Dayton speakers, Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to the Dayton community that has worked to put this speaker series together. I know what organizing it means because I'm an organizer myself. Yesterday, when I was coming through immigration at Chicago Airport, of course, I was welcomed by a grouchy immigration officer. They have to be. I mean, that's part of the job. And seeing an elderly Indian woman in a sari, her first question was, "So you're coming to visit your son?" And I said, "No." "Then what are you coming for?" I said, "To give a talk at the University of Dayton." "On what?" And I talked about the future of food and sustainable agriculture. And this man was transformed. He immediately started to talk about how there weren't hormones when he was growing up, but everything has hormones now. And he wanted to chat forever. And his grouch was gone, and he was a human being. And that's the real issue about food, that it touches all of us. And at this point of time, we have 2 presents of food, and those 2 presents are going to shape the future. How the conflict between these 2 food systems and food cultures, if you please, is going to play out. And how it plays out depends on every one of us. There's nothing of an iron law that it'll go in one direction. It'll be shaped by active citizens making their full food choices in a food democracy. I think the real clash of civilizations is not Huntington's idea of religious conflict. The real clash of civilizations is taking place around our food. And one culture of food, one civilization of food, includes something that is totally ignored. The fact that 80% of the food today does not come from agribusiness, but from small farms, and especially women's labor. 80% of the contemporary food supply is small farm-based. But in our minds, we are made to think that without a Cargill, there'll be no food. Without a Monsanto, there'll be no food. Now, add to that 80% supply the fact that 25% growth is taking place in the organic movement everywhere, in the United States, in Europe, in India. So this is the dominant system. It's the majority system if you think in terms of the people involved, if you think in terms of the food security provided. This is the larger system. But the other system is dominant in power. It's dominant in terms of both economic and political power. If the larger system that is made invisible is based on small farms, biodiversity, ecological principles, and by and large, local provisioning, the smaller system, which presents itself as the large one, is based on monocultures, on industrialized farming, on large-scale farming, and a globalized distribution system. And of course, the latter system is trying to predate on the former. And that's the clash of civilizations. There is a real food war going on out there on every farm, on every plate, in every institution. The smaller system that would like to be the only future of food is the single biggest problem in ecological understanding. It accounts for 75% of all the biodiversity loss. The United Nations Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources was shaped after a big convention, a big conference in Leipzig in Germany, and they assessed at that point 75% of all species that disappeared because of industrial farming systems. And I know for my country, before the Green Revolution, which is the name they give to industrial agriculture in India and in Mexico and in Philippines, it's not very green, it's not very revolutionary, but it got the name because they had to find a color other than red. If you know, 60s red was a problem. Of course, today red is not a problem because red is the color of the global marketplace. India used to have 200,000 rice varieties before the Green Revolution. And then the Green Revolution would bring one, it would fail, it would get diseases, they'd bring another, they'd bring another. Through Navdanya, the movement I started for seed saving, we've saved 3,000 varieties of rice. And one of my most satisfying activities really is to see how varieties we've just protected, because I believe every variety, like every person, has a rightful place in society and nature. And suddenly we find a variety that was treated like an orphan is the center stage in a changing climate or in responding to new nutritional crisis. So 75% of the biodiversity erosion problem in agriculture, 70% of the water abuse in agriculture is because of industrial agriculture, both because of the high demands. I mean, your aquifer, what's it called, the Ugalala? How do you say it? No, we say aquifer. Well, you know the one I'm talking about. Getting totally mined. And you know, when I fly over this country, one of the most ugly sights is these huge irrigation systems that create circles in the desert. You don't need to abuse water that way because you could use much less water if your systems of farming were based on respect for the soil, respect of biodiversity, and were able to work with ecological systems and hydrological systems. My book, Soil Not Oil, has traced how 40% of all greenhouse gases that are leading to climate change, and of course your next speaker is going to be talking about the whole issue of climate justice, 40% greenhouse gases come from an industrialized, globalized system of food production and distribution. 18% directly, and that includes the emissions of carbon dioxide from fossil fuel use, and the fossil fuel use in industrial agriculture is largely a result of replacing human beings with what Emery Lovins has called energy slaves. So for every single American, there are 300 invisible energy slaves, that is fossil fuels, being used for the giant machinery. At the planetary level, it's not reducing the pressure. It's increasing it. You have nitrogen oxide that comes from the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And one of the things that's hitting me increasingly is that these nitrogen fertilizers, they were made in the same factories that during the war used to make explosives. So you have the recent bombing in Delhi 4 days ago at the High Court in Delhi. It used for fertilizer bombs. The Oslo bombings used fertilizer bombs. 2-3 weeks before that, the Bombay bombings used fertilizer bombs. The Oklahoma bombings used fertilizer bombs. Nitrogen oxide that these synthetic fertilizers emit is 300 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. And then all those factory farms where you imprison animals and torture them, feeding them grain that they don't want. They want grass. They're called herbivores. They aren't called carnivores. We fed them meat and turned them into mad cows in England. And we're feeding them grain, which is just not suited for their diet. As a result, we have turned what is the ultimate gift of an animal, soil nutrition, into one of the worst pollutants. And when I talk of soil nutrition, whenever I think of animal waste becoming a pollutant, I can't but go back to my own background in India, where we actually have a day to worship cow dung. It's called Govardhan Puja. I mean, that's the name. It's the day dedicated to the worship of cow dung, because cow dung is the source of all wealth. It's also the day where women are absolutely free to really talk honestly about the men. It's an interesting, for those of you from anthropology, follow it up. And then you add the whole issue of global transport, that's called food miles. We are just constantly shipping food around. The issue of processing and packaging, which is an industrial activity that takes up its own levels of energy and fossil fuel use. We actually now have a law in India turning our food systems into processed food systems, and as if packaged is good, as if the can is good. Now, you had that 50 years ago, but now you realize fresh is better. We've always known fresh is better. But that's exactly where the alternative that is superior needs to get extinguished. I would say it's 50% of the global health problem, the industrialized system of farming. It has left 1 billion people hungry. And if you really want to understand how it is at the root of hunger, think of the fact that of the 1 billion people who are hungry, 500 million are producers of food. Now, why would a rice-growing peasant not eat their rice? Because they've taken credit for the chemicals to grow that rice. So they have to sell it to pay back the credit. And the way the gaps work between what farmers earn and what a consumer has to pay, when the farmer becomes a consumer, they're having to buy the same rice at 4 times the price, again on credit, again on borrowing. And so there's this vicious cycle, pushing more and more people to hunger when they could be totally food self-sufficient. We've got 2 billion people on the planet suffering from diseases related to food, whether it's obesity or hypertension, or heart problems, cancers. There's constant denial of the link between toxics and cancer. But Punjab, which is where the Green Revolution was introduced to India, is a land today where a train has been named the cancer train. 50% of the passengers are cancer victims traveling to Rajasthan to a charitable cancer hospital where they can be treated. It's become an epidemic. For the hunger problem of denial and deprivation of food, it just got worse with 2008 when the financial crisis hit. But linked to the financial crisis were many other phenomena. The fact that those who had speculated on real estate, what they call subprime crisis, moved out of housing and said, now let's turn land and food into the next commodity on which we speculate. The diversion of food to biofuels, and of course, the earlier diversion to feed. I mean, of the corn in the United States, 30% is going for biofuels and 70% is going for feed. So where is the surplus? It's all being misused. All the grain is being misused. Now, when the 2008 food crisis of the price rise started, I remember dear President Bush, who had always very interesting things to say. He said it was us in India to blame because we were a very large middle class, which is not true. When they say the middle class, it should be somewhere in the middle. No, what we have is a growing elite and a displaced middle class. And he talked about 300 million. That's not the number of the elite. So he should call it the top class, not the middle class. Then he said, we were getting so rich, we were eating more and better. The point is, if you eat 2 chapatis, you eat 2 chapatis. Even if you get rich, you don't start eating 5. The lovely thing about our little stomach is it does need food, but there's a limit to how much it can eat. My landlady, I remember in Bangalore, when I was leaving Bangalore to come to Dehradun, she made a wonderful meal for me. And then at the end of the meal, she said, I could have given you a very expensive Mysore silk sari. But I decided to give you a meal. Because if I gave you a sari, you wouldn't like the color, you wouldn't like the design, you would be dissatisfied, no matter how much I spent. But if I cook you a good meal, you will be satisfied. And I wanted to have you go with satisfaction and good memories of Bangalore. President Bush also said we were eating better. The problem is with the globalized system, we're actually eating very badly. And we're eating less. Our per capita consumption has dropped from 177 kilograms per capita per year to 150. And when I say we are eating worse, the poor are not eating at all. Every 4th Indian is hungry. We have a report on this. We did last year. Every 3rd Indian woman is severely anemic, and every 2nd Indian child is wasted. Our hunger figures are bigger than Africa now. And this is while India is growing at 9%. I would say it's because India is growing at 9%, because whatever is making India grow is being taken away from providing food to people. Whether it's the land that grew the food, or it's the livelihoods that got you food, that destruction leads to deprivation. And just today's, it's called, what is it called? USA Today, which is usually a very trashy paper, I have to say. But today they have an important piece of news. 15.6 million older adults in the United States are facing severe hunger problems. 15.6. Between 2007 and 2009, just in 2 years, there's been a growth of 63% of food insecurity in the age group of 40 to 49. These are the working people. You get thrown out of a job, beyond a point, where do you get to eat? Of course, there's another figure I remember reading, how every 3rd American was turning to gardening, both as a result of this food insecurity, as well as for the feeling of having some meaning in life. And that's, again, the 2 cultures in conflict. the dependency culture, and the self-provisioning culture. We are clearly what we eat. And beyond a point, our bodies can't be cheated. Beyond a point, you can't fake the food and expect no disease outcome. I mean, high fructose corn syrup from every doctor I've met talks about it being such an artificial molecule, it goes and directly attacks the liver. And since so many of the children's food are now laced with high fructose corn syrup, children are getting cirrhosis of the liver. These are artificial molecules that just should not have existed. I mean, trans fats just should not have existed. They started to exist because it was convenient for an industry to make huge money out of it and huge profits. So we can't cheat our bodies, even though corporations can cheat our pockets and our minds. How do they cheat our pockets? By making high-cost food appear cheap, by collecting our money to change the prices. And how do they cheat our minds? Through the myth of more. So one is the myth of cheap. It's a myth because if you take the real costs of production into account and the real costs of externalities, whether they be ecological externalities of damage to soil, damage to biodiversity, damage to the atmosphere, and damage to our water systems, and add to it the externalities of health damage, we just couldn't afford that kind of food. It would not be in the market. So how does a totally dysfunctional food system not just survive but expand? I can think of at least 5 processes through which an unjust system, an unviable system that would never exist in human history has become dominant in our minds and would like to dominate everyone's kitchen and all of farming. The first clearly is the undemocratic use of our public taxes. $400 billion is what rich countries pay. It's said to pay farmers, but I would say pay agribusiness, because these are subsidies that go to buy the bigger machinery, to enlarge your dairy. Ultimately, it's rooted via the farmer, but it goes to business. And even in a country like India, 1.3 trillion rupees a year is given as subsidies to chemical fertilizers. This is larger than our defense budget. And our defense budget is not small. The second way in which this unsustainable, unjust, unviable system dominates is through hijacking policy and law. We saw it happen during the whole lead up to WTO in the GATT, and because I was so involved in this, we followed day by day. There's a horrible treaty which has a very long name. It's called the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement of WTO. Just say creation of seed monopolies. This agreement, basically the only thing it did new beyond what were intellectual property and patent regimes at national level was introduce patents on life and patents on seed, Article 27(3)(b). Monsanto is on record to say in getting this treaty done, they were the patient, diagnostician, and physician all in one. They defined the problem, and the problem was farmers save seed. For them, that was a problem. And they offered a solution, and the solution was it should be treated as a crime to save seeds. So we've seen that happen in this country where more than 1,500 farmers have been sued. We've seen that happen in India where our patent laws have been changed. And I started Navdanya, the movement for seed saving, in 1987, when I heard the companies talk about genetic engineering and patenting and how that's the future they wanted. So for us, saving seeds is our ecological and ethical duty, because seed embodies life. Saving seeds means protecting life. We've received these seeds from our ancestors, we owe it to future generations. So not only do we save seeds, but we also have a pledge inspired by Gandhi, who went to the beach when the British said, you can't make salt, only the British will make salt. In a country like India with hot, hot summers, you need a lot of salt in our food. So Gandhi went to the beach, picked up the salt from the sea and said, nature gives it for free. We need it for our survival. We will not obey your salt laws. And we will suffer the consequences. The British had eventually to withdraw the salt laws. So we take inspiration from that and his movement was called the Salt Satyagraha. Satya means truth. Agraha means the fight for truth. We call our movement the Bij Satyagraha, the seed Satyagraha, the fight for the truth of the seed. What's the truth of the seed? The seed wants to renew. The very word seed, the very word bija in Sanskrit, is that which renews forever. So renewal is its truth. Multiplication is its truth. One tiny seed, in the case of millets, can give you 1 million seeds, which is why the millets are called millets. Of course, they've reduced it to cattle feed in this country, the most delicious grain. And the other part of the truth of the seed is it wants to share. Tell me of a seed that tells the butterfly, go away. Wants to be shared at the human level. And so all cultures of the seed have been based on sharing, on the commons. And we take a pledge to say we will not obey a law that prevents us from performing this ecological duty of saving and sharing seed. And 2004, they tried to make it illegal to have seed diversity in India through laws that are very complicated, they're called compulsory licensing laws, and we stopped it. They tried to introduce it again this session, we've stopped it again. And our sense is that even if the law comes on paper, we have a duty to not cooperate with bad law. Because again, Gandhi, of course, as you will notice, is my big inspiration. He said, as long as the superstition exists that unjust law must be obeyed, so long will slavery exist. And Gandhi first practiced civil disobedience as satyagraha, the fight for truth, on 9/11, 1901. We call it the other 9/11. 1901, when the apartheid regime was trying to split South Africa along racial lines and wanted everyone to have an identity badge. I'm an Indian, I'm a black, I'm a white. Gandhi and the Indian community said, we will not be divided. We are one citizenry. We will not wear these badges. And that was the first time he actually practiced the idea of not cooperating with bad law. And then he did it with the salt, and he did it with compulsory planting of indigo, which had led to starvation and hunger in India, when the British were forcing farmers to grow indigo even if you starved. Well, the agriculture agreement of WTO, which is another agreement, was literally drafted by Cargill. The Cargill vice president was deputed to be the representative of the US government in the trade negotiations. Cargill wrote the agreement and was imposed on the rest of the world. And that's why it shows. The agreement has 3 sections: market access, domestic support, export competition. The word food, the word soil, the word farmer doesn't exist. It's all about markets. And of course, they've tried repeatedly to use these treaties to tear down the food security systems of countries. I remember 98, Cargill and other agribusiness companies, they were calling India the El Dorado of soybean. Now, why were they calling India the El Dorado? Because we eat a lot of pulses. We eat a lot of dals. They thought they could replace all the pulses with soybean. But we also have a lot of diversity of oilseeds, and they thought they could replace that too. And so they went through a whole mechanism of getting the duties reduced, having the local oils banned on all kinds of health grounds. And again, I had to do a satyagraha. That time we called it the Sarson Satyagraha, because mustard was banned, and I'm getting calls from the slum women to say, our children are not eating food cooked in soya oil. You've got to bring the mustard back. So we made a mustard oil bottle, for the organic mustard, and I invited the Chief Minister of Delhi to receive this first bottle of civil disobedience. The interesting thing is, the other day, I was visited by Muhammad Yunus of the Grameen Bank, and he came to our organic store in Delhi, and he said, "You've got mustard oil?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Finished in Bengal." Bengal's local oil used to be mustard oil. They don't have mustard oil anymore. But because we did this civil disobedience, it's still in the market. Now, of course, big business is also putting virgin mustard oil. And the wonderful thing is, even though the law is still on paper, banning all this, once you start the practice, that law is on paper. It's not in our lives. It's not in society. Another aspect by which I would call it the marginal system is trying to dominate is by criminalizing the alternatives. One of the most serious things we face right now. In the US, there's a new attempt to make a law. I think it's called S501. They're going after small dairies that do fresh milk, raw foods. Anything fresh is dangerous. And of course, the person who's really pushing this is Michael Taylor, who was a lobbyist of Monsanto, and he's now the head of FDA. And while he's pushing GMOs on the one hand, he's also pushing these laws. In India, we had a very strong law to prevent adulteration. It's been replaced by a so-called Food Safety and Standards Bill, which is criminalizing the street foods. They put out ads every day of women cooking in the kitchen as if that's where the danger comes from. From our hands, from our mothers, from our kitchens. And in the European Union, we've created a new food safety authority, which tries to do the same, except they have to face the French peasants who just refuse to obey. You know, the French have wonderful markets, village markets, and they wanted every market to have, for every person who brought vegetables, you had to have running water and a fridge. You know, you bring your little van, it's full of fresh vegetables, you sell it by the afternoon. Why do you need running water and a fridge? And the peasants absolutely removed, and they refused, and they had to change it. But the aspects of these laws that have started to sink in, and one of them is the criminalizing of biodiversity. Now, you know, vegetables like to grow in different shapes and sizes, as do fruits. And in any case, diversity is good for the planet and for our health. But they have this amazing idea of relating health and food safety to dimension. I call it Descartes' ultimate victory. And so if your cucumber is not straight and that long, you can't bring it to the market. If your apple is not a red delicious or whatever, you know, apples are the same world over now, even though this country had so much diversity of apple, and across the apple growing areas there's been so much diversity. So a potato, my region has a wonderful potato called tomri, but each tomri potato has a different shape. Yeah? And a potato with personality not allowed. It only has to be the russet Burbank that goes into the McDonald's French fry packet. You know, it's decided by the shape of the package. So we are becoming totally mechanical in the way we define safety. The fourth level at which the takeover is being attempted and a future of food is being designed is by simple lies and propaganda. And this is taking place in genetic engineering more than in any other field. I remember I was in South Africa to launch their GMO Freeze campaign. These are campaigns that take place where people don't want to have GMOs in their market. And the campaign was being launched with a debate with the biotech industry. So while I was walking to the hall, there was this young girl running after a woman saying, "Mama, mama." So I knew the older lady is this young girl's mama. And then we got into the debate. And from the floor, that young girl puts up a hand and at the end of the debate says, "You are preventing people like me from going to school. Because my mother is a landless peasant in Kenya, and if we don't get the new seeds, I will be deprived schooling." So I said, "But you're Florence's daughter." And of course, they were very angry because I knew this. Well, Florence Mbambugo was the face of the genetic engineering industry in Africa. She was supposed to have developed a virus-resistant sweet potato. The project has failed. Absolutely failed. But yet in the literature of the industry, it's still there. If any of you have read The Economist of last month, there were ads about India. Whole page on cotton, which say, "India delights as cotton farmers' lives transform for the better." And then at the bottom, in the middle is all about how farmers are buying motorcycles and TVs. And the ad is fascinating because it's got an American suburban house and two Americans standing there. And obviously, even the ad agencies do a bad job. So Farmers' Pride, India's Pride, Bolgard 2. Now you'd wonder why there's Bolgard 2, why not Bolgard 1? Because Bolgard 1 failed to control the bollworm. They even planted a story in India, leading Indian Daily, called "Reaping Gold Through BT Cotton." And they mentioned two villages, Bhamraja and Antargaon, to say farmers have become millionaires, not a single suicide. In 2008, Manohar Rawat committed suicide in Antargaon, and Ganesh Mate in 2004 committed suicide in Bhamraj. And we are now undertaking a house-to-house study to show the status of every farmer in those villages. India has witnessed 250,000 farm suicides in the last decade. A crisis that is really of a genocidal scale. And because we study these suicides, and we have a fat report called Seeds of Suicide, the suicides began in the cotton area when first hybrids and then BT cotton were introduced, and they're all related to debt. And debt is a result of replacing renewable seed with non-renewable seed, which is patented, and therefore huge royalties are collected. Monsanto was collecting 10 billion rupees of royalty in cotton alone from India. In less than a decade, India, which is a land of cotton, we had 1,500 varieties, is today 95% BT cotton owned and controlled by Monsanto. These seeds are not working, as I mentioned. The BT cotton is not controlling pests, leading to new pest creation. Our studies show 13 times increase in pesticide use. The combination of high-cost pesticides, high-cost seed is debt. And the farmers are committing suicide on the day the agents who've loaned them this money for buying the seeds and the chemicals, and it's the same agents, because seed and chemical companies are the same companies. The day the agents come and say, "Your land is mine because you haven't paid back your debt," that's the day the farmer will usually go to the field, drink pesticide, and end his life. And the widow will only come to know after the event. There was an interesting article. I mean, Monsanto is so good at placing ads and articles. They had one written about how women were getting liberated through BT cotton. And their justification was there are more women working. I mean, very thorough study about how more women were working as cotton pickers in cotton fields. Now, I remember in slavery days, cotton picking wasn't the best of things. Women are working in other people's cotton fields because their land is lost, their husband's gone. Now, this study goes on about how if the women are working, then the husbands are sitting at home and cooking and looking after the children. And I had to do a response to say, no, the husbands aren't there. That's why the women are working on other people's fields, picking cotton. And the only thing available is cotton. It's become one large monoculture. In this country, the second kind, so BT is a cotton in which you put a toxin into the plant. And you have BT potato, you have BT corn, and now the plant produces its own pesticide. It's supposed to control pests. As I mentioned, it's not controlling pests. In the US, there's news about the corn borer becoming resistant. The other category of applications in 20 years is herbicide-resistant crops. In the United States, this has led to 15 million acres being overtaken by superweeds that can't be controlled by Roundup. And now farmers are being asked to spray Agent Orange that was used during the Vietnam War. At dinner, there was this talk about the fact that we're going to have 9 billion people, we have climate change, and therefore genetic engineering is necessary. The first point is, genetic engineering does not increase the yield of any crop. So far, there are only 2 traits, the herbicide-resistant trait and the BT trait. That accounts for 95% or more of all genetically engineered crops planted. These are toxin-producing traits. And the yield comes from the original crop into which these traits were introduced, not through genetic engineering. Yield is anyway a complex trait where many, many genes must work together. It's not a single gene trait. And there's a very, very good study called Failure to Yield by the Union of Concerned Scientists that shows that there isn't an increase in production because of genetic engineering. In India, Monsanto's ads talked about 1,500 kilograms of yield of BT cotton. The average has been 300 to 400 in these many years. So we can't build a future of food on myths. We can't build a future of food on failed technologies and false promises. And we are producing a report which will be released on the 6th of October on the status of GMOs and Monsanto's promises. It's a global report from across the world. What's happened to Argentina? What's happened to Mexico? What's happened to Africa? What's happened to Europe, Canada, United States, Australia, Japan? We can't build a future on an agriculture model that has become a cancer on the planet. And we definitely cannot build a future of food on a food system that instead of nourishing us has become the source of disease and ill health. We need another future of food, and that future of food has to be built on the majority situation. We've just completed a study that shows that biodiverse ecological farms produce much more food. In any case, this has been known. It's been known that biodiversity enhances food production. In technical language, it's actually called the land equivalence ratio, where if you grow a monoculture on 1 hectare and compare it to a polyculture on the same hectare, you can get double the food, you can even get triple the food output from the same acreage. And it makes total sense because the plants are cooperating with each other. You put beans along with corn, you enhance the yield of both. And I was so thrilled because this is a system we use. It's a system the Native Americans have had, and they call it the 3 sisters. Yeah. Corn, beans, squash. And I was invited by the German parliament some time ago, and they insisted I go see the gardens because they know my passion for gardens. And I visited this garden set up by Bosnian refugees, women from Bosnia. And I loved it. One whole corner had the corn, the beans, and the squash. You want to control weeds? The squash does it for you. You want to fix nitrogen? The beans are doing it for you. we've just managed to totally forget how much nature provides, both in terms of nutrition per acre and in terms of alternatives to toxic chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides. A rich, ecologically balanced agriculture does all the work that chemicals do. A rich, ecologically balanced agriculture brings more food to our plates. There's a very, very good report. I would recommend all of you read it. It came out of the Johannesburg summit, which was 10 years after Rio. And everyone realized that agriculture was a missing piece in looking at the environmental problem. So all the UN agencies joined up to commission a report. 400 scientists worked for 4 years. It's called the International Assessment for Agricultural Science and Technology. And what they've done is go through every peer-reviewed publication in the world. And the conclusion is neither green revolution technology nor genetic engineering can feed the world. Only ecological farming systems can. This year, the United Nations Rapporteur on Food submitted a report to the General Assembly, again based on published work, showing that if we practice agroecology, which means bring ecology into agriculture, bring nature back into farming, we can double food production in 3 years' time. So the claim that we can't produce more food by protecting the planet is just not true. In fact, it's the only way we can produce enough food for people. And the systems that address food insecurity and address the issue of hunger and malnutrition are also systems that provide solutions to climate change. I mean, in terms of nutrition, let me just run through a few quick figures. A typical small farm in my region gives you protein 4,214 compared to 242 of a chemical monoculture. Calcium 5,000 versus 218. Iron 143 versus 50. Potassium 11,000 versus 6,000. Another small farm, I love this, beta-carotene, 2,540 milligrams of beta-carotene versus 24 for a monoculture system. Now, we have farming systems that produce all this nutrition, and yet we want to genetically engineer rice into golden rice with 34 micrograms. We can produce 2,000. Our typical foods in India have a coriander, a little bit of curry leaf, 1,400 micrograms, 70 times more efficient at bringing you nutrition. So we've shrunk and shrunk and shrunk our mind through what I have called monocultures of the mind, and we look at a tiny bit and say, I've done better. So we reduce the diversity of this planet, which used to give us 8,500 species of plants as food, to 8 globally traded commodities. That's all. Everything is corn and soya now. We've taken the diversity of uses of every plant and said only grain, because that's a commodity. The straw disappears, the feed disappears, the compost disappears, the food for the soil disappears. And that food for the soil is vital in times of climate change. If our soils don't have organic matter, they don't have adaptation capacity. If our soils don't have organic matter, they don't have water conservation capacity. 20 times more resilience is what our studies show, is the increase in terms of water holding capacity. And 200% in some cases is the carbon return to the soil, which contributes to mitigation. You're literally pulling out the carbon dioxide from the air, letting your plants fix it, and give it back to the soil, where the soil becomes your biggest carbon sink. And it is a biggest carbon sink than all the forests of the world and the oceans. But we have done the opposite. We've allowed the carbon to escape, not replenished it, and therefore our systems are so vulnerable. Each time there's a little drought, each time there's a little flood, our agriculture starts to collapse. In terms of water, we actually do these experiments on our farm. We've reduce water use by 70% without affecting yield. And that too is only possible if your soils have enough organic matter and you have enough biodiversity. The farmers get more income if their incomes are not leaking out for patented seed, for toxic chemicals. It's a solution to poverty. That's what we've been doing over the last 25 years through the movement Navdanya. And because there was a need, we built a school. I call it the School of the Seed, the Beej Vidyapeeth. I think around food, we can build the biggest social movement of our times because it's a social justice movement. Food justice is social justice. It's a peace movement because more and more conflicts are taking place around food. Even in Egypt, people were carrying signs about the price of bread. And it's just the beginning of the food crisis. If we allow this present scenario to unfold, we will have food wars, we will have food riots, but we have an alternative. We can have food peace, but even more importantly, we build food democracy and we build our food sovereignties. It involves issues of how is our money spent in terms of subsidies. It involves issues of knowing how our food was produced and what's in it. It includes the right to know. It includes the serious right to make choices. And as I often say, the choice begins with the farmer who has to choose the seed they grow and not be denied the right to freedom of seed. And it ends with each of us as food sovereign eaters connecting back to the earth and connecting back to our producers to say we are one community of integrity. We are one community that works to protect the land, to protect the earth, to protect our biodiversity, to protect the livelihoods of farmers, and to protect the health of our species. The choices we make will decide whether we have a future as a species, because food is what maintains any species. And if we give up the food system, we allow it to be taken away. The system that says we will be the food providers cannot provide food. Their technologies are failing. You can't live. You can't feed yourself on bad advertising. You need real food. And you can't allow seed the first link in the food chain to fall into the hands of one or two companies that can't even do a good job of breeding. We need to reclaim our food. We need to make food our everyday business because it is. We eat every day to live. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, for that inspiring and deeply informative talk. We will take some time now for questions. So if you have a question, please come to one of the microphones here to my right or to the left. We'll give just a minute for those folks who need to leave. And just to let you know, this is usually the best part. Although that was amazing. Okay, I'm going to invite Theo to ask a question.
Okay, I wonder if you could talk about the issue of human migration and labor as tied to food production. For example, one of the forces driving U.S. or Mexican migration to the United States over the past 30 years has been the growth of industrialized agriculture in Mexico. That is one of the things that have led to displacement of many small landholding families in agriculture. Many go to work for agribusiness firms in Mexico, but especially migrate to the United States to become migrant farm workers.
Well, the destruction of agriculture accelerated as a result of globalization. I remember 94 when the Zapatista movement rose. It was a result of NAFTA and the dumping of corn, because corn is hugely subsidized and therefore ends up being cheaper when dumped, just as like soya bean is hugely subsidized and becomes cheaper in India than our local edible oils. This crisis that you talked about in terms of Mexico is happening everywhere. Because even though small farms are more productive, and even though, like I said, 80% of the food supply of the world comes from small farms, there is an ideological commitment to wiping out the small farmer. And I think it's partly psychological, it's partly economic, it's partly political. I remember when I started to do my studies on globalized agriculture and the entry of US agribusiness in India, reading something from one of your policymakers saying peasants and farmers must be driven off the land like the last bit of toothpaste is removed from a toothpaste tube. And I think this comes from the fact not only that when you get rid of farmers, then you create the market for your machines, your chemicals, and everything else, but it's also because independent small farmers are the ultimate reservoir of freedom. And a system trying to control society is very scared of freedom. It's extremely scared of anything that's free. And I remember this very clearly. It was 92, and we had a 500,000 member protest rally against the GATT. And with me was the Environment Minister of Brazil, José Lutzenberger. Now he's no more. And José sat there in this ocean of 500,000, and he said, "This is why they must be destroyed. They're free. And that is why we must create another future of food for our freedom."
Hi, wonderful talk. I just wanted to know, being a student, what is your message for a student for preserving or like having a good future of the food?
Well, a student, like anyone else, is an eater. And that's where it all begins. And students are the ones that are targeted most for helping the bad food future be created. You know, don't think, just slug a bit of Coke, eat a bit of chips. It's so convenient. And I think we really need to start talking about these things as inconveniences, because it's going to give you the inconvenience of diabetes. It's going to give you the inconvenience of all kinds of diseases. But you're not just an eater. I think students have always been the change agents of society. You know, take the Vietnam War. If it wasn't for the students, you wouldn't ever have stopped it. Students need to be at the forefront of creating a future food that works for all. And that means engaging in change at home, with your communities, in your institutions. And I think university campuses can be a major place for building a social movement around the food issue.
Hello. Oh, I'm too tall for this. As you said before, bad food is cheaper. It's easier access. And I was thinking, how do people with like low socioeconomic status, who don't have access to go to Whole Foods and get organic tomatoes or whatever, and the only real food they can afford is like McDonald's or something. And I was just thinking, like, they're the majority of the population. How can they do something?
Well, you know, I think the food system integrates us. And I think we've got to move beyond dividing society and saying this is their problem, this is their problem. It was a farmer's problem for a long time, and now, you know, this is a problem of just the poor community. No, it's our collective problem. And the reason high-cost food is cheap is because it's subsidized at every level. I mean, in India, we have such affordable food systems, but they're being rendered outmoded because Pepsi gets huge subsidies to take potatoes and turn it into chips, rather than let the potatoes go to the hundreds and thousands of local food processing industry. They get tax holidays, they get free electricity, they get free water, they get subsidies on packaging. I mean, just add it up. I think this is the homework that needs to be done. Add up all the subsidies we give to make high-cost food artificially cheap, and therefore distort the options. The second issue is, in any case, all the governments spend money on feeding people. All governments. My country has a huge feeding program. We have a big conflict right now around these two cultures of food, where we've been building a whole thing. They're saying, if it's school feeding, let the mothers cook so that children get healthy, hot food. Industry is saying, no, 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 no. It should be packaged food supplied by us. They're going further and saying, let it be cash vouchers. So the whole food system goes into dysfunction. Each of these issues every day is being debated. Your entire food stamp system, it could be renovated in a dramatic way to address jointly the three crises this country is facing. The economic crisis linked then to the unemployment crisis, and a food crisis. I think so many Americans are in denial that there's a food crisis here. And both the food crisis, the food crisis of the malnutrition of not having enough food and the food crisis of the malnutrition of the bad eating. All that can be solved by being innovative. That kind of money, instead of going to eat junk food, could go to support farmers' markets. And again, you don't leave it to the poor to just go by with a particular food stamp. Wherever people have intervened, and I was told there's a sister here who's doing all kinds of innovative things, wherever people have joined together as community, as a food community, these are very solvable issues. And of course, for you in the United States, I would say, one of the things that need to be overcome is the schizophrenia in the White House. Michelle Obama runs an organic garden to deal with food deserts, and President Obama keeps approving GMOs against court decisions. So if they would just talk to each other a little more, we could solve the big problem.
Thank you for a very informative talk. I'd like to ask a couple of things. The first one is, you mentioned about green revolution in India, in the Punjab region, and my understanding is that it was more about wheat cultivation. So what was the effect on the varieties of wheat that was available of the green revolution on it? That's one. And the other one is, how did Monsanto manage to get all these cotton farmers to buy into their product, and what's preventing them, I mean, seeing the result, what's preventing them from going back to their original varieties?
Well, on the first issue, Punjab didn't just grow wheat. Wheat was always grown with mustard or with chana, chickpea, always polycultures, and about 250 crops used to be grown in Punjab before the Green Revolution. After the Green Revolution, Punjab became a monoculture of wheat in the Rabi season, which is the winter season, and a monoculture of rice in the rainy season. As a result of which, we actually lost a lot of other food crops. So India, which was the biggest grower and producer and exporter of pulses, a family of crops that the rest of the world should really get introduced to, the dals, the nitrogen-fixing protein crops for a good vegetarian diet, they were displaced. And now we have a pulse scarcity, and we are importing a horrible, horrible yellow pea dal from the United States, which is subsidized. It has no taste at all. Oil seeds, our sesame, our mustard, our linseed, all of those were displaced. And in both these, we are net importing countries now. Again, the monoculture of the mind just looks at wheat and rice and doesn't look at the rest that disappears. If you add the disappearances and the import dependence, we haven't increased our food basket. It actually went down. In terms of native wheats that used to be in Punjab before the so-called high-yielding varieties, because we conserve varieties, some of the ancient wheats that we bring have twice the price because they have twice the nutrition. People are willing to spend twice as much because they know they're getting better taste and better quality. In terms of cotton farmers, what prevents them? What prevents them is basically the fact that when Monsanto enters any region or any crop, it does two things. It encourages farmers to replace their seeds. And I always say, seeds are not like dirty socks. You need to change your socks. But good seed is permanent. But they convince them, no, here's a superior variety. They bring ads. They used to bring ads to the villages in video vans. Two kinds of ads. One was American farmers with big hats and big tractors. You'll be a millionaire like this. Not telling the story that the American family farmer is also indebted. And the other is they'd mobilize every god in India. We have 300 million divinities. Anything you touch is a divinity. And so they'd, get Guru Nanak in Punjab and Hanumanji in South. Hanumanji bringing the seed, saying, here is the Sanjeevani booty, the saving herb for you. And, farmers are used to having faith in their gods. So they would believe these ads. And between getting the seeds replaced and saying, give up your old seeds, and pushing the market, but there's a third, more important thing we've just found out because we did a study exactly on this question. It turns out Monsanto has now controlled the entire cottonseed market by licensing arrangements with local firms. And the local seed companies are obliged to only sell Monsanto's BT seed. They're not allowed to sell any other cottonseed or any other variety in that area. And that's why we've started seed banks, community seed banks is what we do. And we've started 3 in Vidarbha, which is the highest suicide area. And it's amazing, the production higher, income is higher, and it's growing. I mean, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to go against the entire environment that has been contaminated. And the worst thing is, just like your government gets hijacked here, our government gets hijacked too. And our Cotton Research Institute, which used to breed 25 varieties of cotton every year, since Monsanto entered, hasn't released a single variety. So it's like they're told, go home, don't do any work, we'll take over the seed sector. And the seed sector is the most vital part of who will control the future of food.
One last question.
Hi, I'm Karen, and I teach anthropology here at the University of Dayton, and I have a number of students, kind of like this young lady here, who, when I bring up food and sustainability and food sovereignty, inevitably the question comes up about, organic certifications and other certification processes, different ways of kind of labeling foods and talking about whether or not there's a bit of, I guess, this marketing that you're speaking of in relation to the gods. There's kind of sometimes this god of organicism in the United States. And so places like Whole Foods will have products that they promote as being organic. And there's always sort of a question, I think, for a lot of people as to whether or not these labels are in fact serving us in any way, if in fact they're just driving up costs. I buy a grass-fed cow from a local man that is a friend of our family, and he told me everything about how he raises these cattle. They're sort of a part of his family, but he said, I can't give you my organic certification because the costs of getting certified with all of the hoops you have to jump through are so extensive. He's like, I can just tell you the process that I use, and I hope you'll take my word on it that it's organic meat. I guess I just wanted to ask you if you think that there could become, with governmental systems and labeling processes, some sort of a tyranny of labeling.
Yes, there's a tyranny of labeling.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no guarantee better than the fact that you know the farmer who's growing your food. That's the only affordable, authentic guarantee. And I think we have to move from certification systems, which are high cost, anonymous, and you can't really be sure, to authentication systems of guarantee, which are based on direct relationship.
Right, and I think that's
And
hard.
I think the farmer's market, to me, is really the alternative, the direct communications.
Okay, thanks.
I see someone actually jumping up and down in the back. I think you have really excited us and inspired us tonight. So in closing, I want to thank Dr. Shiva for feeding us with seeds of ancient knowledge and living passion that promise to sustain us in our social and ecological justice movements for many years ahead. I encourage you, if you'd like to purchase or bring one of your books downstairs. She will be signing books for a little bit. We need to get her back to her hotel before too long because she's flying to California in the morning early. But we do have a small gift, token of thanks from the university that we'd like to offer. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And the book signing will be in the KU lobby on the first floor. So on the same floor as the Barrett Dining Room and the Torch Lounge, but out in the main lobby area. Thank you.
So Sheila, this won't fit in my bag.